So always take a few moments thinking about your posture, and while you're doing that, just this little turn. And it's quite interesting, this exercise, I think, from the point of view of, well, several points of view, but I was thinking more about getting a sense for why we take these particular postures. So, what we're looking for is that slight dropping in our hips. Never so much that we're actively straining our knees. You'll feel it in the muscles of your legs. It'll be there in the tendons, but you'll notice it more in the muscles, quite likely. Rather than me telling you what the effect of this is, just very carefully as you're turning, pull your knees back so you straighten up until you just feel that your knees are about to lock up, and feel the difference it makes to your lower back and your hips and anywhere else you notice any difference. And just try that a few times, up and down. For me, there's much more resistance here to the movement, the turning, than when I'm sinking down. Here it's really quite loose. And if that's true for you, then one thing that we notice is that dropping of your hips and the accompanying dropping of your center of gravity there, the rooting down, however you think of it, actually releases this movement. Remember, a part of what we're trying to do, a lot of what we're trying to do in Tai Chi is to not resist movement, whether that be movement within the body or outside the body. But obviously, these exercises, our principal focus is what's happening within the body. And Tai Chi is sometimes described as effortless. Generally not by people who come to my classes, I have to admit, because it isn't effortless. It's kind of a wrong translation there. What it is a very different type of effort. It can feel almost effortless. It's like, well, you're not doing anything. You are. It's just that you're not doing what you would normally do to move your arm or whatever, and you're not resisting that movement. And in the end, this is really one, I would say really one of the primary goals, to get that smooth flow, both in if you like, sort of purely physical terms, and the joints are looser and so on, but also in terms of the movement, the momentum, the energy itself. And so, yeah, with this exercise, with the faster movements, the rhythm is more obvious, the flow can be more obvious, and we can also, as I just did with you, play around and find out, what stops the flow. What happens if you just try and move your arms and don't turn your body, just move from your shoulders, for instance, and so on and so forth. And then go back every now and then to this whole body movement, this very distinctive quality that we have. And then just raise your arms. Elbows are slightly lower than your hand. Hand is no higher than shoulder height, and slightly in front of your body. And your hand is cupped. You can just see there. So it's like you're holding the ball in the palm of each hand. And although there isn't any active weight there, it can be quite interesting to imagine that you're holding something heavy in your hands, because one of the things that does happen over a period of time with Tai Chi is that the way that your body responds to imagery really accelerates. It's something that your body would do anyway, but it, in the way that we use body and mind, we actually train that facility. And what you should feel is that really along the inside of the arm, the tricep and I can't remember the name of the muscles, whatever they are, they're kind of working to suspend the arm, but quite relaxed. And then if you turn your hands palm over, of course, that's going to change what is actually supporting your arm. So your muscles shouldn't be tight and hard, but rather a bit like the cables of a bridge. If you see a large bridge, you see the big steel cables. You don't see them out tight and stiff. You see them with these gentle curves in them, and if the wind blows, they're kind of flexible. So in the end, no one part of your body is going to be wholly responsible for supporting your body. And then let your hands drop down. Another image I like to give people is of a tent. And there are various, some more modern architectural buildings, so geodesic dome type things, follow the same principle. That the load of supporting the weight of the structure, the effort supporting the weight of the structure, is spread through the whole of the structure. And in the same way, obviously our legs are bearing our weight. They're working quite hard, but nothing is isolated. Other things come into to play as well. Just gently rocking your weight forwards and backwards with your arms following on slowly. As you go forwards, your hands are behind slightly, and we feel that little bit of opening in the front of the body. We then get that drawing in. It feels like almost like the sternum is, breastbone is going back, and then we get to here, and it's like the spine is. This is very exaggerated. It's just you shouldn't see anything like that much movement when the exercise is being done properly. But you want to feel those movements within your body, so that what is moving your arms, again, the effort is spread through your body. It's not your shoulders on their own. Obviously, again, legs, your weight moving are going to be very important. But even there, you may feel a difference between, say, your calf muscles, your thigh muscles, and so on. And then various patterns of movement within the upper part of your body. Now bring your hands in so you're carrying a tray of drinks. So there's again the image of a little bit of weight in your arms, your hands. Soften your elbows, don't let your elbows go behind. And as you go forwards, you may just want to extend so that it's a pivoting out from there. You can see there, and the angle of your elbow will become a little bit shallower. But also see if you can just get a sense almost as though your fingers are lengthening out as well. So that little rhythm that comes from the movement of your weight forwards and backwards in your feet creates a sort of pulsing that goes up through your body. Again, these are all elements that in one way or another we will find in all the movements. So exercises like this are very useful for really spotlighting processes that sometimes can be a little bit hidden in some of the more complex movements. And then bring your hands in, put your weight in the correct position, sinking down and pushing up. One more time. And then changing. Focusing your attention in this way should also give you a chance to develop a very calm quality in your mind. It takes our attention very deep. So it becomes I suppose you call it concentration. I'm not sure that concentration is a great word, because I think it has connotations of tension and stiffness. Kind of gathering of your thoughts, perhaps focusing of your thoughts might be a better way of describing it. And then changing, parting the clouds. And then once again, changing, dragon plucks the stars from the sky. One more on each side. Now pushing in 4 directions. Remember that little thing that we did at the start when we were just swinging our arms around? We found that letting the hips sink back, pelvis drop, allows for a much freer movement in the middle of the body. We need that now. So although we're not going up and down here, but we want that constant sense of the hips just sort of dropping. We almost went too far there. That can happen. What needs to happen is as you drop, you let go here in the lower part of your back, and the pelvis adjusts and stops you do what I just did there. So if we're going to turn, then we need that looseness. Otherwise, when we turn, we'll be fighting against our own body. So just let's think about this exercise. Our arms aren't flopping around, they're not swinging around in the same way as in the first exercise, but apart from that, it's actually very similar. So when we do the turn, we want to try and feel the same sense of flow, quality of movement. And overall, we want to try and feel that our body is settling into the same steady rhythm, which is quite a big ask when moving this slowly. Very easy to lose the rhythm. We expand, contract, expand, and contract. And although we might have particular point of focus, now I talked about the idea of gathering your thoughts, might say have the center of the body for this exercise as a particular focus. It shouldn't be exclusive. Also in the back of your mind, an awareness of that quality of movement, that rhythm, not having to sort of consciously think about it, but very much there in the way that if you drive a car, you're aware of the background noise of the engine. And then changing, circling palms. But this one too, even if we do it without the turning, we have this rotation in the shoulder. Remember, if you tighten up in your knees in the way that we did earlier, deliberately, that will cause a tightening in your hips, which in its turn will cause a tightening in the shoulder. And that will make this movement more of a strain. And then add in the turn. And then switch sides. and then add in the term. And then roundabout. One more time. And then to stand and go back to this little springing exercise. Give your legs a little shake. I used the term concentrating earlier. We have to be quite careful, I think, with how we understand some of these terms. We need to remember that arts like Tai Chi and sort of related practices can come from a very different sort of cultural, historical background. And a lot of the initial translations that we've been left with, of people who went over maybe in the 18th or 19th century, actually weren't that great, and were often, ideas are often translated through the lens of a very westernized culture. So, often there was a bit of guesswork in finding the right term. So it's important to recognize that. And most characters in Chinese, for instance, can have a variety of meanings depending on context. If anybody's familiar with it's a wonderful work, the Tao Te Ching, is sort of the root text of Chinese Taoism. It's a lovely, sort of almost poem, really, very clear, and just some really interesting ideas in it that relate to Tai Chi. But I've got one edition of the Tao Te Ching, about 3 times as thick as any other edition that I've got, and the translator has gone through pretty much every single character in this work and offered different translations for it. And some of them have 5 or 6 possibilities, sometimes similar, sometimes quite different. And so we have to try and get a sense of how to understand them. In our own language, the same is true, but the context is much more obvious to us. So a term like concentration, for instance, in some of the early Buddhist writings that talk about meditation, the term is samadhi or samatha. It is often just translated straightforward as concentration. But quite often we think of concentration as quite a hard thing. You've got to really concentrate, and everything else is cut off. Which is why I offered, and this is not original stuff from me, by the way. It's stuff I've pinched from other teachers. Offered other possibilities. This idea of gathering your thoughts rather than concentrating. For instance, I think I may have used for people here in the past an image of a sheepdog herding sheep, and so on, to try and get some kind of the flavour of the word that we're using. If one thing doesn't mean anything to you, then maybe something else does. But it can be a bit of a minefield trying to understand exactly what was meant by by these terms in the original sort of writings and in the original teachings, particularly if they're very old, because then that also plays a factor. So I often try and give more than one idea, if you like, or more than one sense of what it is I'm trying to get across. Let's just sink down a little bit again. Transfer your weight a little bit just to make sure there's a bit of movement there. But when you've done that a few times, come back to the center and we'll do stretching between heaven and earth, building up slowly from the basic movement with your weight 50% in each leg, sinking down, turn one hand palm up, push up a little bit, feel the opening through your body on that slight diagonal line, coming back holding the ball. And your hands almost touch as they slide past each other. Again, we have that rhythm, expanding, contracting. And again, you may find that your breath just naturally adjusts to that rhythm. In which case, it will probably be an in-breath on the expanding stage. But then sometimes you might find that actually your breathing pace, your breathing rhythm is slightly different without actually interfering with the rhythm of the physical movement. Start moving across and push up on one leg. You may find the heel of the opposite foot comes off the ground, down in the middle. Be careful when you go across into one leg. You're looking for this, not this or this. So think about that alignment. And if it's not working out, then as always, don't feel obliged to go to this stage or any of them. Finding the ground before you extend. So again, aware of the weight in your feet. And then again, if it's comfortable, you bring the foot in, step out. I like to step out a little bit wider, as you can see. And then, again, if you wish, raising the foot. If you do that, you'll find that to an extent, when you come back down, you're sort of going down on very much on one knee. Just be careful with that. I mean, if you've got very good knees and are very flexible and are very strong and are trained to do this, frankly, I'll still be very careful. And then come back to the center, straighten your feet out. Still moving from side to side, but now with this coming up a little bit in the middle and down. And going into the bear play. A nice, smooth, fluid quality in your back and your spine. Very much connected. Each of the vertebrae links to the one above and below it through muscles and cartilage pads and so on and so forth. So you want to get the feeling of the spine moving in a nice fluid way, as very much as one unit. Like if you get a scarf and you sort of put it on the ground and flick it, the wave will move nicely along the scarf if you can get the rhythm correct. And in the same way, this wave-like movement through your spine. As I said before, I think this is a useful exercise to really help us to get a sense for that energy in our spine, because for a lot of the exercises, we're asked to keep our backs to fairly upright. I won't say straight, but upright. And if we're not careful, that can lead us to being a bit stiff in our back, which certainly shouldn't be the case. I think bear play and swimming dragon are really good exercises to sort of counter that tendency a little bit. But we're going to change now. We're going to change into hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. Simply turning out, sinking down, and then sink down in the supporting leg. But as you do, release the opposite hip. So once again, finding the ground beneath the leg that you're moving your weight into. Remember when we were carrying the tray of drinks, that way of extending the arm. I mean, we call it hitting the ball in front of the shoulder, but you could imagine that actually what you're doing is that you're handing a drink to somebody. You don't want to spill it all over them, but that same kind of aware quietness within the dynamic quality of your arm. And there's a surprising strength that comes through from that, I think. It's always surprising when I first realized. Let's do one more on each side. And then we're going to go into cow gaze at the moon, where if it suits you, you can get this slightly more extended movement, which will take you a little bit out of line. So make sure you sink down in the supporting leg. But remember, this is not a competition. So how far can you go without finding that you're tightening up? Remember that softer quality, even in a big exercise like this, should actually be retained. So if you want to do this quite big, you might find you need to practice it for a while. Just gradually push out those boundaries. One more on each side. So this is very much a horizontal rotation in the center of the body. Once again, get your feet, sort of sort your feet out, and then look for this vertical rotation in the body. I'm exaggerating. I mean, you can see I'm really pulling my legs out of line, but the thing I want you to notice is what's happening here, like a seesaw. And again, the curve through the spine, I do it a little bit less, so I'm not going so much out of line. Nice and even, nice and smooth. And your hands press lightly together so that, you know, if you press hard, you'll strain the wrist. You really want the wrist to flex and extend. And then, you could stay with this. This is a nice movement. You can feel that movement in the spine, but I'm going to take it on. Remember the three circles: the lower, the middle, and the upper down chin. Just let your hips drop a little bit. Bring your hands around the lower, and then in between belly and solar plexus. Your throat, and then tracing the outline of your head. Coming back down. Swimming dragon. So at the moment we're doing this in the wider stance. A little bit easier on the legs particularly, and on the back, I think. But if you wish, if it's comfortable for you, bring your feet together. And here, notice your knees. It's really important. Keep your knees soft, because now you're getting that kind of wave-like movement all the way through your body, which is lovely as long as it's not actually hurting your knees. So whichever is the sort of most useful to you, most comfortable for you. And you can swap. You might think, well, we're going to go the other way. So you might choose, for instance, to go back to the wider stance for a little while. It's up to you. It's important to listen to what's going on in your body. Let your body tell you when you've had enough of something. It doesn't matter how good the exercise is. If you've reached your limit, then you need to stop. Be gentle with yourself in movements. Remember, this is not a practice where we're encouraged to sort of go harder, faster, strain, build up a sweat or anything like that. Almost the opposite, in fact. And then we're encouraged to soften, to release, to go slowly. And it's interesting what we find when that happens. It's difficult. I think sometimes people come from other exercise forms, find that mindset really quite difficult to understand. Well, how can it work? And yet, there are studies being done out there, aside from our personal experience, that suggest that it really does work. A lovely quote from somebody who was a very big name in the Tai Chi world, Grandmaster Yang Sheng Fu, who lived in Beijing in the 1920s. And I love the quote from him, which says that at the far end of softness, we find a different quality of strength, for instance. So it kind of redefines. Again, in a sense, we have to rethink what we mean by these terms. 1 foot forwards, transferring your weight. When we start to do this, the initial feeling is that your upper body is quite passive. We're told the upper body sits on the hips, and that's to encourage us to really pay attention to what's happening in legs and feet. Your legs and your feet are going to be the primary motivators. In reality, though, I think there's probably no such thing as an upper and lower body. It's not like you could kind of cut somebody in half. Oh, there's the upper, there's the lower. It's not that straightforward, I think. So anything that happens in the legs is going to affect your hips. What happens in your hips will affect your pelvis. That will affect your back, and so on and so forth. So there is stuff happening in the upper part of the body, and we can feel that quite strongly if we imagine being in water. If I was in water here, up to shoulder height, and I used my back leg to push my body forwards and did nothing at all in the upper part of my body, the pressure of the water would hold me back. So as I go forward, something has to happen. That front part of the body, we use our imagination to sort of recapture the feeling of how we move in water. If that doesn't make any sense to you, then fill a bowl up with water and then just get your hand and kind of flap your hand around a bit. It's like, oh yeah, that's all right. You can do that. You can hold it quite stiff and flap it around. Even hold the wrist quite stiff. Then put your hand in the water. Try the same thing. You'll get a very different response. And part of that different quality of strength is connected to that different way of moving and that different way of encountering resistance. You need to raise your toes and your heel. Yang Sheng Fu was talking very much in terms of the martial aspect of Tai Chi. Not meeting force with force. But there's many areas in our lives where we meet resistance, physical, whatever, in all sorts of ways, in ourselves, between ourselves and other people, and so on and so forth. So there's any number of sort of relevant applications beyond just simply fighting. Who wants to fight? And then stepping in. And shake out. I think a really good example of that is in our basic posture. And I've talked about this before, that the resistance that we're meeting is the pull of gravity. Because we're trying to be upright, we're trying to lift this heavy thing on top of our spine, and so on and so forth. And if we get into the fight, we get into the strain, it's a constant sort of strain that eventually wears us out. But by aligning with the pull of gravity and finding a way of non-resistance, if I think of it like that, we realize that the very thing that is pulling us down can also, through careful attention, bring us up. And I mean, that's just one example of how we might apply these ideas. On the other side, transferring your weight. It's also interesting that it can come out much stronger physically because you're trying to relax certain muscles, certain parts of the body and even that requires a bit of conditioning before it can happen. Usually, it means that this spreading of the load is actually sort of facilitated by that softening, that relaxation, and so we start to engage parts of the body that often are missed. And then raising your toes and your heel. And then step in. And then whichever direction works best for you to start off with, taking some steps, just a few. Either way, whether you're going forwards or backwards, your foot will come in, swing forwards and down. Change direction if you haven't done so already. And then bring the feet back. So we're always looking to see what is working through the whole of the body in Tai Chi. And again, we just need to be aware that that isn't that is different to other forms of exercise. I'm not suggesting one is better than the other. It depends what you do. As we were talking at the beginning of the class, sometimes it's used to have specified exercises for, say, bone loading. That's very important. So it's not a question, but to get the most out of Tai Chi, we want to understand that we're not thinking of the body as a kind of a muscle here and a muscle there and that kind of thing, but rather as one whole unit, body and mind really as one whole unit. 1 foot forwards. Actually, have your right foot forward, so mirror my movements. And starting off with this bird folding its wings, which combines nicely the transfer of the weight that we were doing with these, I suppose you could call them auxiliary, but with these additional movements in the upper part of the body, which is where a lot of the variations in Tai Chi take place. And where, because they're often quite small movements, micro movements, that's where quite often the focus of our attention and various ways that we use our awareness can have the most effect. By most effect, I mean in terms of variations of pattern. I'm not suggesting that we can't influence what's going on in our legs and feet through our awareness. And change into fisherman castanet. And then pushing a wave, pushing a boat. Might be a good exercise to explore that notion of a different quality of strength. The idea of moving in water is one of the most common, if not the most common image, I think, that we find in these arts. And then leaving the front hand, or rather the hand above the front leg, behind, go back, turn, bring the hand into position. Front hand turns palm up, and then pulsing the monkey. With your head facing the front, and then turning a little bit further outwards to reverse the movement. Body expands and contracts. And if you're again, if you think about the breathing, think of your body as being like a bellows you pump a fire with. And as it expands, you're drawing the air in, whether you're breathing in or not, beside the point here. And then when you press the hands of the bellows together, when there's that contraction, the air is forced out through, I don't know what it's called, but through the narrow bit of the bellows, the nozzle or whatever. And you can think of your arms being like that. So you kind of draw the energy, store it in your belly, and then just in your mind, pushing it out through the arm. Good. Change over. Changing. And change. And then Pulse the monkey. It can feel as though the front hand is fairly passive and static in one stage of this movement. And that can be quite difficult. We can end up compensating that by doing too much. But imagine, for instance, that you're just trying to open a very stiff door knob or something like that. And I'll come a bit closer. Use my legs, but here, notice how that winding movement connects with the turning in the center of the body. I'm exaggerating now. This. So that can, if you can pick up on that, then you'll realize that it's not passive. It's not just hanging there doing nothing at all. Good. And put your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. And your arm. The other side. Your back. Around your hips. Your legs. Your belly. Good. And embrace tiger, return to mountain. So standing for a moment, still soft in your hips, and then just let gravity pull you down a little, pushing up, extending out, that same rhythm, and drawing in. The emphasis very much on that drawing in, closing down, quieting down, however you think about it, and really however you experience it. If you want the breathing, you could breathe in here and breathe out, and then breathing in and out. And again, that sense of whatever the mechanism is, whether it's the breathing or awareness of the pull of gravity or whatever, the same sense that what you're doing is gathering in here, bringing both body and mind back to a kind of still point for a moment before you move on again. One more time. And stand. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. So,
Right.
look after yourselves. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you all
Bye.
soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.